This is the story of a daring prophet, a struggling widow, and a miracle that defied all odds. Long ago, during a severe drought in Israel, when the skies refused to pour a single drop of rain, the earth was barren, and people were plagued with thirst and hunger. It was a tough time for everyone. Among these desolate lands, the prophet Elijah roamed. God had sent Elijah to challenge the people of Israel to return to their faith, but the drought made his mission harder. But here's where our story takes a turn. God commanded Elijah to go to Zarephath, a town outside of Israel. There, he would encounter a poor widow whom God had promised to provide for both of them. Quite the twist, considering the widow didn't even know this yet. When Elijah arrived at Zarephath, he saw her gathering sticks at the town's gate. She looked weary, her face marked with exhaustion and hunger. Elijah greeted her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she turned to fetch it, he called out again, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." Her response was heartbreaking. "As the Lord your God lives," she said, "I have no bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and prepare a meal for myself and my son, so that we may eat it and die." It was clear that this widow was at the end of her rope. But Elijah, filled with faith and assurance in God's promise, said to her, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." Imagine her hesitation. In her mind, feeding Elijah would mean less or nothing for her and her son. But something about Elijah's words, perhaps his tone filled with divine assurance, stirred her heart. She went home, used what little she had, and did as Elijah instructed. And here's where the miracle happened. Day by day, as she used the flour and oil, they never ran out. Each time she reached for the jar, there was enough for the next meal. It was as if every day God himself replenished her supplies. For many days, Elijah, the widow, and her son had enough to eat, even in the middle of a brutal famine. This was no coincidence. It was God's provision for those who obey and trust in him. But the story doesn't end here. One day, her son became gravely ill. His condition worsened, and eventually, he stopped breathing. The widow, overwhelmed with grief, turned to Elijah and said, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Elijah, deeply moved, picked up the boy and carried him to the upper room where he was staying. He laid him on the bed and cried out to God, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" Then, he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and prayed, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." In that moment, another miracle occurred. The boy's life returned, and he began to breathe again. Elijah carried him down and gave him to his mother, saying, "Look, your son is alive." The widow exclaimed, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." This story reminds us that faith and obedience can lead to miraculous provision, even in the face of impossible odds.